Now let's talk about the Bay Area. Let's generalize our observation. Not everybody's a homeowner. Some people are renters. Not many people know that there are millions of decisions made every day of the year in America on something called the Affordability Index. And allegedly, if you spend 30% of your income or less, you're in an affordable housing situation, if that's what you spend for housing. And John will remember, we looked long and hard for the source of that information, the secret committee. I finally found the source of the information. It was the last line of an Old English poem, 300 years old. It was called A Week's Pay for a Month's Rent. Now you know the entire science behind this. But we had to prove it, so we did a project for the Brookings Institution and created something called the Affordability Index. Now, that red line shows that somewhere out from 8 to 12 miles from the center of every town in America, housing prices start dropping dramatically. Realtors joke about this, and they call it the drive till you qualify market. But the other thing also happens. The yellow line comes in, transportation costs go up. So what's the relationship between those two? Don't you have to pay both costs if you're a real person in real time? So we looked at this for 28 regions, and we looked in particular for what working families earning $20,000 to $50,000 were spending. And in the Bay Area, we found that while 36% was going for housing, another 27%, almost as much, was going for transportation. And if you're unfortunate enough to be low income, you can't afford to live here at all. Less than $20,000 a year, people were paying 120% of their income, which is why people crowd up for the sum of these two. 71% between $20,000 and $35,000, and 52% between $35,000 and $50,000. So we created an index that added these transportation variables to the affordability index. We mapped it. This is free, by the way. I mean, you should really all try this. We paid a lot of money to do this. Go to htaindex.cnt.org. Just type that into your address bar.
If I knew about this website, we wouldn't have paid you for this data.
Right.
Okay.
Well, we don't sell the manual with it. And we've got 55 regions in there now. We're upgrading it next week. You didn't know this, but we'll have our greenhouse gas maps in there too, which you'll be able to use to make your SB 375 case. And by June 30th, we'll have all 337 regions in America. All right, real quickly now, the Bay Area. The map on the left is a map of density. The darker it is, the denser it is. The map on the right is the map of autos owned per household.
I'm going to cut you off for 1 second. I'm going to try to fix the lights so we can see these a little bit better.
Okay. And this is where I tap dance and sing.
I don't know what this is going to mean. Okay, that's...
You gonna work?
I'm going to try, I have to experiment a little bit. Yeah.
Great. Hey.
Yeah, do it fully dark for 2 minutes. Do it fully dark for 2 minutes. That's it.
All right. Now everybody light a match and hold it. Okay. Okay. So what you notice is that the auto ownership and density are mere images of each other. Similarly, this is the map of vehicle miles traveled per household per year. And you will also notice these are mirror images of each other. By the way, the geography we're mapping at is called a census block group. There's 5 block groups per census tract. So we've sort of turned the focus dial on the microscope here. Now, we also created a connectivity index that looked at scheduled rides per hour from all transit services. And you will see that this fairly reliably predicts the transit mode share. Where you've got the most rides available, you've got the most people riding to work, right? And so forth. Now, if you put it all together, the map on the left is the official map of where housing is affordable for median income households if you only count housing costs. The map on the right has taken the same income cohort and added transportation costs. The cream-colored areas are the affordable areas, and they've shrunk up. So that if you thought that it was bad enough that something like 800,000 households are not in an affordable situation, it's 233,000 households worse when you count transportation expenditures. Now last summer, gas expenditures spiked at over $4 per gallon, and what we did here is we mapped what households were paying. So a range of between $300 and $3,800 per year went from $1,100 to $6,200 per year. The economists tell us we're only 18 months away from that next spike, by the way, and will you be ready? we looked at what households were then actually paying in total for transportation and what percentage of income they were paying. You can see, red is bad, by the way, in case you didn't figure that out. So all those people who drove out to the, or moved out to the east to a more affordable situation got a very rude awakening. The housing was cheaper, but the gas and the car was anything but. Well, same thing happens in Chicago, in Denver, in Seattle, in Twin Cities, wherever you look in America, it's the same thing. And this, I know I'm out of time, but just bear with me. I rode my bike a long way, all right? Even at $2 a gallon, if you've got 3 cars and you're driving 35,000 miles a year here, no transit, and you shoot for spending only $15,000 a year for housing, you're going to spend 73% of your income for housing and transportation. If you go down to, let's say, 1 car, 15,000 miles a year, $100 a month for transit, $20,000 a year for housing, you've lowered your transportation cost to 56% for the sum of housing and transportation. And because of city car shares great work, you can live here with no cars and good transit if you pick the right place, pay more for housing and still pay just a little over half of your income for housing plus transportation. Now, it's not as good as it should be, but to get to your point about the long-range regional plan, and by the way, this region has the only regional plan in the country that has set a goal for lowering the combined cost of housing and transportation. The goal is by 10%. And we've been working with them to try and help them figure out how to tweak the plan for different income cohorts so that actually will happen. So in addition to the excellent plan from TransForm, watch for an MTC release, this region is spending $39 billion, let me put it another way, this region's households, you, are spending $39 billion a year for transportation. Over the next 30 years, your planning horizon, you're going to spend $1.2 trillion over the next 30 years. The economists say you can't build enough transit or transportation choice because there's an unwillingness to pay. $1.2 trillion a year seems like there's money anyway. Now, lastly, greenhouse gases. This is Chicago. The map on the left would seem to indicate that in terms of greenhouse gas emissions that high density is bad. That's because it's measured in tons per acre. If you measure it per unit of activity, in this case tons per household per year, all of a sudden density looks pretty good. And in fact, we built that into the Chicago Climate Action Plan, which I unfortunately don't have time to go through. We've shown how you can use this in a new urbanist transect to show that as you get more and more urban, your carbon footprint goes down. And the same thing works right here in the Bay Area. And so it's pretty good where it's good, right, around the Bay. It's pretty bad every place else. And we can talk during the workshops about what it's really going to take to retrofit it. Last point. So if you think about all that extra financial pain I just talked about, you might think that it would cause some other sorts of financial problems. Well, it does. We started mapping foreclosures in Chicago going back to 1997. And anything that's colored in is a foreclosure. And green is sort of bad and blue is terrible. Watch real closely. 1997, 1998, 1999, 2000, 2001, 2002. You see that blue emerging? 2003, 2004, 2005, 6, 7, and there's 1998 versus 2008. Now we've just started to collect some data for the Bay Area. This isn't easy, but it looks to us like maybe transportation costs didn't cause the foreclosure problem all by itself, but it sure made it a lot worse than it would have been, and it will definitely prevent the solutions from working unless you do something about it. So here we are. We're in the United States. Somebody want to turn the lights on? We're just committed over $2 trillion to bank bailouts, to bank workouts, to neighborhood stabilization programs, and what have you. And you know what any of that stuff has to say about transportation? Zip. So I want to suggest that there's some real magic in all this stuff. I mean, I could show some other pictures later about what's actually working to sort of slim down. I remember they told us we couldn't beat obesity either, and nobody would get out of their car or ride bikes or walk or any of the rest of that stuff when I used to be a health issues organizer. I think part of the message here is that what you have to do to beat greenhouse gas emissions and what you have to do to make life affordable is largely the same set of somethings, over 90% congruent. From a politician's point of view, this is great news that the same two groups of people wake up in the morning thinking about different things. That's the making of a good coalition. You all know that. And if that's true, then it's very, very important that common cause be made with people who are pushing for beating severe poverty and wealth deficits and disparities, and people who are actually working to make your region livable and sustainable. And I think that it's going to require some new tools to do that. The report that Stuart and Elisa have produced, which you'll get to see in much more detail, and which it was a privilege to work with these guys on, I think helps make that case neighborhood by neighborhood in exquisite detail. And I'm reminded of the quote variously attributed to Mark Twain and other people, that if your only tool is a hammer, you tend to see all problems as nails. So it's really time, I think, to start to take this stuff into account. And there's a risk. I mean, there's no question. If you push hard enough in this direction, you make these investments, the risk is everybody will be wealthy, and that would just be terrible, right? So think about it. Thank you very much.
I want to ask just one question about how people can get this information once you have the report in your hand. So as I said, there is a session afterwards where Scott will be around. He'll also be around for the 15 minutes before then. I'll just ask him one question. We were hoping to have a little Q&A, but I really loved that intro, which kind of gave that historical context. So we don't have time for the Q&A, but I'll ask one question, which is, once this report comes out, and we've got this data for the Bay Area, and we're going to drill down a little to the city level to show local governments how they, as well as their residents, can save depending on not just where we build in the region, but within a city, where you build in a city. How do you think people might be able to best use this? Where should they take this to have an impact?
Well, if they are an elected official, they should take it to everybody in their neighborhood or the area that they represent. If they're thinking about becoming an elected official, it's my experience, it's a great thing to run on. It really makes a difference. If you're about the business of setting targets for affordability in a local or a regional housing plan, and you show that you're not going to make any of your targets unless you hit transportation targets as well, it's a powerful controlling sort of argument to be able to make. If you're about the business of demanding reinvestment from a financial institution or from a government to hold a financial institution accountable post-foreclosure crisis, you can set targets not only for what people should invest in, but where you should invest in it. If you're into green buildings and green communities, don't you ever get caught just endorsing any old LEED-rated building, particularly if it's out in the boonies. I mean, we invented this phrase, driving to green buildings, a couple of years ago that's caught on. You know, building out way out at the east end of Costa County without BART access, you're going to spend more energy getting to and from there than you saved in the building. It's a really powerful set of arguments to be able to show that this stuff doesn't cost, it pays. You shouldn't tolerate any discussions about where are we going to get the subsidy. You should be having a food fight over who gets to do it first. There's a big difference about that. For equity organizers, finally, this is the Holy Grail. This is the way that you can set targets, not just for public spending, but for wealth creation in every community in the region. If you can really drill down and get at those bigger numbers. If you're stuck in the corner of sort of incrementally tweaking the bike budget and the CMAQ budget and the enhancement budget, while you're all stuck collectively spending your share of that $1.2 trillion, forget it. You're not spending your time well. So that's where you take those arguments, what have you, and then you too can feel good about being, wearing a tie and coming to meetings like this in California.